SouthCoast monthly event. I'm Patrick Berry, the president of TiE-SouthCoast. I encourage all of us to continue to enjoy your meals while we work our way through the introduction. TiE-SouthCoast is one of 61 chapters in a group, TiE Global. The organization has its roots to the Silicon Valley area. In 1992, so a group of individuals of that descent got together to form an organization to help entrepreneurs become successful in the Silicon Valley area and start businesses. The organization grew and began to expand. It is now a very inclusive organization. It spans across 17 countries, 61 chapters, has a membership of around 13,000 individuals and 2,500 what we call charter members to manage the organization, and that's by membership only. And then members, which anyone may join and become a member of TiE. And there are a number of benefits, one of which is to attend some of our events, our TiE-Institute events. And now let me talk about the event this evening. So Sanjay Jha, the former CEO of Motorola Mobility. We'll have a fireside chat here, moderated by Anil Kripalani. Anil is the current president of Wirefree Incorporated. He's a former senior VP at Qualcomm. I'm going to ask Anil to step up, maybe tell a little more about himself, and introduce the speaker this evening.
Patrick. For those of you who don't know, Patrick is a Navy SEAL that don't fool around with him. In fact, he trains Navy SEALs, so that's even more significant. This event today with our chief guest, Fiona, the better half, has been in the making, has been in the planning, has been in the desired events for 2 years. Sanjay, and we were not successful because he kept making changes. Changes in splitting the company, or cooperating with Greg Brown to split the company, and then trying to bring it to San Diego, but then being attracted back, and then Google. I mean, how can you ask for him to come here when those kinds of things are happening? But I get ahead of myself. Again, I'm Anil Kripalani. I used to be TiE chapter president here and also on the TiE Global Board of Trustees. My background is Qualcomm and Bell Laboratories. And wireless and the origins of wireless I've lived through for the last 28 years. So I don't profess that I have all the questions down here for Sanjay to give us the full expose on. So I expect that I will quickly turn to the audience. So get your questions ready, and we will do this interactively. Let me introduce Sanjay. Sanjay served as CEO of Motorola Mobility beginning in June 2010 and chairman of Motorola Mobility Holdings from December 2010. He stepped down from these roles after working the deal with Google. We really are honored to have somebody who's made so much news with that. I'm sure we'll find out as much about that as you all are willing to ask. He joined Motorola in August 2008 and served as co-chief executive officer with Greg Brown of Motorola and chief executive officer of Motorola's mobile devices and home business. And a lot of his people are based here, the people who were in that division. He was also a member of Motorola's board of directors until the separation from Motorola Solutions. Prior to Motorola, which is where I knew him, he served as EVP and Chief Operating Officer of Qualcomm, where he oversaw corporate research and development, and Qualcomm Flarion Technologies, the acquisition that we did in, I believe, 2005. QFT. And of course, most significantly, particularly from revenue point of view, the Qualcomm CDMA technologies, I think it's been relabeled. There are a few QCT people here, so you can tell me what the new name is. But QCT, which was 60% plus of Qualcomm's revenue for all this time, and is really the moneymaker. It's the chipset and software division. He began his career in Qualcomm in 1994, senior engineer. 97, he was promoted to vice president of engineering, led the integrated circuit engineering group. Then he led 5 generations of MSMs, the modems that go into the phone, and cell site chips, the CSMs, both digital baseband and RF, and system software. He was promoted to senior VP in 1998. So that was a fast move to that position. Then in 2002, he founded and served as general manager of Qualcomm Technologies and Ventures. So that was his exposure inside Qualcomm to investing in, to looking at new technologies and new entrepreneurs, startups. So he has direct experience from that, as well as other things that he did at Motorola that have to do with entrepreneurs. So those of you here who are looking to ask what it takes to get interest from such companies as Motorola and Qualcomm, there's an opportunity and a lot of background here in our chief guest. In 2003, he became QCT president and EVP of Qualcomm. So, and most significantly then, after that, before his going to Motorola, he was chief operating officer of Qualcomm from 2006 on. Before that, in England, or the UK, Brooktree Corporation, well, Brooktree was here, San Diego, and GEC Hurst Research Labs in London. He has a PhD in electronic and electrical engineering from University of Strathclyde, Scotland, and a BS from University of Liverpool, England. Please welcome our chief guest to the podium. Again, it's been 2 years, and we've been looking forward to this. And meanwhile, Sanjay keeps making news. And we all know from reading about him, we know the public Dr. Jha and the public Sanjay. I wanted to actually begin with a little bit about you, the person. And of course, there's lots of questions about what platforms and devices and how you work with different companies. I know you grew up in India.
Yes.
Can you share some personal things that might be of use to?
And my parents, my dad is a doctor, was a doctor, he's retired now, and he wanted to do the degree of MRCP. It's actually interesting. I was talking to him. He spends his winters here with us, and I have 4 sisters. My eldest sister at that time had, she's probably the hardest working, if not hardest working and the brightest of us all, had just qualified in an all-India competition to go into the medical school. Then all my other sisters were just as talented. So I actually think in retrospect, my dad made a very, very courageous, and at that time anyway, courageous decision to educate all 4 daughters. It would not have been common practice to educate all 4 daughters. So he did that, but consequence of that was that he had to earn more money, which meant he had to get more advanced degree, and which is what brought us to UK. But at least those set of events led to my dad coming to UK and in England. And we'd never seen snow before, and it was snowing in England. I'll tell you another. I come from I'm a Brahmin. It's not. Only way it mattered to me was that my granddad had decided to have a ceremony called the ceremony of what do they call it? Janot. And which would have been fine. It's just that I was also my head was shaved. So I arrived in a brand new country. I could barely speak English, and I was bald. And I was about a foot taller than the rest of the kids. So I grew early, and then somewhere along the way I stopped, of course. And so I arrived, so that transition, and I had not seen snow, so that transition to England was quite tough for us. And all five of us were. My youngest sister was already in the medical school in India. This gentleman by the name of Sanjeev Sidhu, who at one time, I think some of you would know, was the CEO of i2, and he was, i2 at one time was a very hot company. I think the market cap reached 40 billion at one point. Anyway, Sanjeev is very focused right now on thinking about how people survive adversity. And what happens when people are faced with adversity. And I'm taking a slight detour here. Anil, you would know that once you give me the mic, so
remember this is going on YouTube, so
I should be thoughtful about that. We may have to edit. Anyway, what Sanjeev has found, there's a professor at Penn State, I think it's Penn State, Marty Seligman. He's written a book, The Power of Positivism. What you find is 70% of people faced with adversity, and I can tell you, those of you who have immigrated, obviously a number of us here, people find immigration as a big discontinuity. 70% of people do worse, 20% do the same, 8% actually excel. And you know, psychology, by and large, the profession of psychology is by and large psychology of pathology. It's about pathological conditions. It's not about what makes people successful and why people are happier and what makes them happy. And Marty Seligman has looked at that. Anyway, the reason I go there is that we arrived and we emigrated, which is a big discontinuity. I think actually the history of late 20th century is a history of migration of people, especially living in San Diego. I would say only about 25% of people are what I'd call native San Diegans. The rest of us are transplant from somewhere or the other, whether it's the East Coast or whether it's East Europe or whether it's East Indies. Wherever it is, from about 1930s, 1940s on to the end of 19th century, it's been a huge migration. And I think the Thomas Friedman's "The World, Earth is Flat" has become possible because of that migration. The world is a better place for that migration. But people who migrate actually go through a fairly traumatic process. And you can look at the history of migration from every country to every other country. But anyway, I think I would say that process worked well for me. I think the reason it worked well for me is because I played a lot of sports and I integrated through sports. I used to play cricket, I used to play, in England, badminton is important because it's bad weather so much of the time. You have to play badminton, otherwise there's nothing to do. So and anyway, I played a lot of sports, and I think that led to a relatively good integration. And then I did a degree and so on and so forth, and came to US in 2001. Fiona and I migrated here. I still remember it was May 31st, it was very hot. Just as coming to England felt very cold to us, coming to US felt, we from Scotland, which is where I did my degree, we were very hot in San Diego for the first little while. And then now, of course, even going to, you know, when the weather gets below 50 degrees, we feel very cold. Our blood has thinned completely like the rest of us here. But anyway, I think a simple plan to go back to UK and save a modest amount of money to be able to buy a home. So that's how I came to be here. So.
Excellent. I don't think anybody on in the web sphere has heard that history probably, but Fiona,
that was actually not for web sphere. Now we're a little worried about it.
I did say to him that he could review the video.
Oh, okay. We'll honor that.
But then Patrick, you and I work that. Fiona, I have new respect for you. The Brahmin, the sisters, You know, that requires quite a bit of me. And also, it would be great at some point to get that photograph. You know, the ball photograph. You know, we have this wonderful photograph posted for this announcement, and next to that could be that ball. Anyway, coming to again on a personal front, you've been Qualcomm. A grown-up startup, because you were there really when there were like 1,000, 1,500 people, and it's now 23,000, and you saw it all the way through the growth and sale of the one thing that I will comment on, and I would love to hear from your vantage point, is what I always noted was the teams, that successful engineering leaders tend to take teams with them. Is that something that you know, how did you foster that culture that, you know, people would follow you, the hard work that's required? Could you comment on that and how you approach it now with both Qualcomm and Motorola?
You know, team dynamic is far more important, almost the single determinant factor, I think, in success of most teams and companies. And I think if you ask most people who work for me, they would say that they would regard that as mixed blessing, I should say. I think that I have always been a hard person to work for, from the point of view that I demand from others what I demand of myself. And on the other hand, I would say that I've always worked very hard to make sure that people are rewarded for producing and delivering. There is a formal and an informal hierarchy in every organization. And what I find is that the informal hierarchy tends to recognize those people who have actually delivered. And I'm very keen that you have to strike a balance between formal and informal hierarchy in companies. And if you don't understand the culture and the informal hierarchy of a company, then you sometimes run into issues. So I've been somewhat thoughtful about that, and has worked for me. The second thing I would say in my management style is I like to build personal relationship with people on whom company success depends. And I don't tend to like other people reporting on other people's work. I like people who are doing the work to report on the work that they're doing. Because visibility is a very important thing in large companies. And if you're doing the work and someone else is reporting on your work, it's actually over a period of time, not in a short period of time, but over a period of time it leads to dysfunction, in my opinion. But those were some of the principles that I applied. And I've always been very operationally focused and very metric driven. So I think those are the things that I felt, those are the things that I valued in my teams.
Very good. Let me add a little side color on my observation of Sanjay. As a 1999, we were very passionate about CDMA technology, and Boo here knows how we worked with the GSM side. Well, here was an engineering senior VP who felt that he should address the other technology, the competing technology, just as much, but he needed support. And he'd call meetings to see how he could do the other side, the 3G that the GSM side was doing. And at which point I labeled him an arms dealer. And so normally people bristle on that, and Sanjay wore that as a badge of honor. You know, I am an arms dealer. Yes, I will build whatever is necessary to build. Now that, I don't know if you stuck with that, or the Android decision seems to be a different one, but comment on that?
Well, it was, CDMA was about, grew to about 17–18% of the marketplace. And there was no doubt we had 90–95% market share in CDMA. The issue for me wasn't, and by any projection, CDMA was going to get into either lack of growth or some decline as 3G came along. And I was very, very worried that if we didn't do 3G, then the growth of Qualcomm's CDMA technologies would be very limited. And I also understood that if we wanted to succeed in 3G, we had to do GSM GPRS, because it's going to be a multi-mode device. And the challenge for us was, in a company which had fought GSM GPRS, or fought is too strong a word, competed so strongly with GSM GPRS, for someone to come in and say we needed to do GSM GPRS, at least seemed jarring at the beginning. I think over a period of time that was accepted as something that we needed to do. So that was, I absolutely knew that the market was headed. Back in 2002, if you looked at projections of where the wireless market was headed, wideband CDMA, very shortly after we did the deal with Ericsson, wideband CDMA was going to be the majority market worldwide. So from QCT point of view, to not address that would certainly have been short-sighted, yes.
Yes, and it definitely was a change in the organization. So I wanted to bring that out.
In the beginning, we had a secret team working on it. We couldn't be public about that.
Yes. I want to just, and I know I have the typical, the questions about devices and the platforms, but just in case this gets lost in the questions that on other topics, you've been both in Qualcomm Technologies, in QCT itself, as an engineer, as a leader of engineers, responsible for and pushing for innovation. I mean, I just draw the fact that GPS went in when nobody else wanted to see GPS in phones. Cameras went in, and the first 8-megapixel cameras, I got laughed at when I talked about it from a podium in India, where, why would we need this? And now we can't live without them. Can you talk about that culture of innovation, looking for it? You have product to put out, but you have innovations to bring in.
And that's always a very, very tough balance. Very, very tough balance. The cutting edge of that is the following. Cutting edge is, there's an engineer saying, if you give me just, for chips, another millimeter squared of silicon, I could do these things, but that has 3-week impact on schedule. That's the cutting edge. And on that day, you sit down and you say, I've got to get this product out, or this innovation is important enough that I will delay the product. That fundamentally is the cutting edge of where that decision gets made. And to my mind, there is no formulaic way of answering that. I think you need a management team which is credible, which listens to all sides of the argument, and then makes a decision. And at the end of the day, once we get to the level that we are in this room, we all get paid for making these judgments. And the process of making that judgment for me was to make sure that a couple of things: understood what the value was, what the market was, and also being able to look the engineer in the eye and see that he could deliver or she could deliver. But I think that's the cutting edge. But innovation is in a corporate environment is a very very important subject, in my opinion, and there is really there are so many books written on innovation, and if you talk to any technology company, none of them will have anything other than innovation. Or if they have 5 or 7 values, one of them will be innovation in one form or another. I think the innovation model is very important. What are we innovating for is very, very important. If you're not clear in your mind what is the vision that drives innovation, I think very often, very, very often, I have a term called corporate entertainment. There are lots of groups and corporations who are spending money, and I call that corporate entertainment because it has no connection to a vision of where money is going to get made. And I think it's really very important to be clear in your mind as to how that technology ties in with the strategic objectives of the company and how that goes to the market. let me just say two ways. There are two kinds of innovation. What I call line extension innovation, which is you're in a space and you want to innovate around it to extend your product line, and there are disruptive innovations. And disruptive innovation is complete Wild West. What you want to do is get some, you got to spend money on that, and there's no, as far as I can tell, any structured way of being able to say how to do disruptive innovation. Almost by definition, there is no structured way of saying how to do disruptive innovation. But line extension, I think, is a very, very, very important part of most corporations' innovation strategy. And I'm not certain that it gets handled particularly well in corporation. I don't know that I would pride myself on having handled that particularly well. It's a difficult subject. It's a function of how much money you have. A lot of companies have strat plans. They have what they call phase 1 innovation, phase 2 innovation, phase 3 innovation. It is a subject that has received a lot of attention. Actually, I'd be very interested in thoughts from the audience on this subject as well. But I think I think there's nobody who's ever against innovation, and obviously we don't do enough of it.
Yeah. So you had the contrast on really it was a startup, but a sort of slightly larger startup, and then it grew up, Qualcomm, and the 80-year-old company, and the contrast on how to bring in innovation. And could you sort of comment or stitch in how you viewed startups? I mean, this is an organization of individual entrepreneurs, and we are always looking for the magic, if you will, to get technology to reach such a point that it's adopted or acquired. Yes. Any comments for the entrepreneurs here on what typically happens and how it contrasted between the two companies? Little complex question.
Ask me the question again, because I think, yeah.
There's a contrast between the Qualcomm and Motorola approach towards innovation. Sometimes you can't do it in the company you acquire.
Yes.
And entrepreneurs are sort of eager to find out what your criteria was.
Yeah.
And of course, there are an older company that takes a different approach.
Sure. I mean, I think, look, the lifeblood of Qualcomm always has been innovation, and Arvind, Paul have it in their blood. I mean, the reason middle management is there is because there were some very bright people who created a business which has grown, but now this business needs to have structure and predictability. You have to have middle management to manage that process. But by definition, innovation sort of complicates their lives. And I really think that the connection between people who are innovating and the management, not middle management, but upper management, is important, because very often middle management's job is to keep the trains running on time, and upper management's job is to think, where is the new revenue source? And that misalignment sometimes makes it harder.
When you comment on the experience, this kind of cuts at relationships with your customers as well, and how do you do that when you are running the challenge in a established company?
I would say that sometimes, and this is a strength that I think we had at Motorola, was that when you're facing the abyss, it focuses the mind quite dramatically. But companies with large cash flow are strategically getting deep position in the technology market, but they don't see the big problem facing the company because the cash flow is so good. So actually, I tell you what, one of the things that I found when I got to Motorola was there was no confusion about what situation we were in. If you have a division, I think of companies where division is bringing a huge amount of money, but there's a growth area that's not being served. I think I could see how that would happen. That company has a huge cash flow. At Motorola, we didn't have that problem. I think Droid for us was do or die. If we didn't produce the Droid phone in 2009 and have success with it, we would have had a real challenge. Droid was important because Google needed it, because Verizon needed it, and because we needed it. And there was one other thing, I know I'm going slight tangent here, but one other thing that happened in Droid, which was which has taught me a lesson about technology that I would take with me, which is that we included an application, turn-by-turn navigation in the Droid. Do you remember first smartphone with a, and that actually was one of the core applications that helped Droid. But also, I think the ad campaign worked very, very well for us as well.
Very good. I'm going to ask one more here and then turn to the audience, so get your questions ready and your hands up. This may be a little longer, but how do you see the consolidation, or I should say the opposite of more fracturing in terms of the device ecosystems, iOS versus Android versus Microsoft? I mean, and there are a few events that are impacting it. I'm sure you will comment on that. And versus Amazon's own, and then more.
You know, I have this view. I think internet is getting siloed. I think you have the Facebook internet, you have the Amazon internet, you have Apple internet, and you have the Google internet. And this goes, if you ever were to draw a vertical stack from chipset all the way to content, you would see that the world is beginning to divide into these four axes, and they compete against each other, have different strengths and weaknesses. And I think it's worth thinking about the world along this vertical axis, because there are different strengths. Amazon has a great channel. Apple has great content. Google has great internet services. Facebook has great social network platform. Microsoft, right now, I think I saw they had $67 billion. A chunk of change. At the moment, by the way, the 5 of these ecosystems combined have over $250 billion on the sideline. All the CEOs are trying to figure out how to use their currency to advance their cause.
Okay, I have lots of questions, but first question, please.
You mentioned something about having a division that's a cash cow, and obviously there's a balance between making shareholders happy and seeing the money come in versus reinvesting in technology and in companies. What is your approach, and how do you convince the board in terms of what direction to go on those?
Very clear. The board's job is 2 things. One is to hire a good CEO. Second is to make sure that there's a good strategy in place. Third, these days after Enron, is to have some level of governance. I think it's board's job to take a longer-term view of corporations, and I think to a large extent it's CEO's job to make sure that there's a strategy in place to look at the longer term. And what you consider strategy and how strategic you can be changes from company to company. But the way, I think to not be strategic is to be a poor CEO, I think. There's a lot of settling out of things in IP world because the convergence that's happening is so dramatic. Apple was a PC manufacturer, now their largest phone manufacturer. IT industries, by the way, the change in IT industry that's coming as a result of mobilizing your workforce, I don't think we've even begun to understand that change. So the industry, the tectonic shift occurring. And
the strategy behind relaunching the Razer brand, and how's it going?
And why did we launch the Razer brand? It's a very good story. We had an offsite at Motorola, and I still remember it. It was in Chicago. It was in November. Actually, there's a general. He came to me. He was very involved in the original Razer, and he came to me and he said, "Sanjay, I think we can deliver a phone which is 7 millimeters thick." And remember that the thinnest phone at that time that we delivered 11 millimeters. And I always believe that thinness really does matter. And as the screens became larger, you had the ability. So we did a bunch of things. The biggest problem, by the way, in delivering that phone thin is what we call the back pocket test, which is especially at that time, back in 8 and 9, very extremely tight jeans were very much in fashion. I think, and I think what would happen is people would put it in the back pocket, and as you sat, the stress that your phone would go through was the #1 structural issue that we had to deal with in designing that phone. But it was important. Razer, though, is a brand name. We've done some testing, and very large number of people still remembered Razer phone brand with a great deal of affection. So that's why we went bad. Plus, there were 3 or 4 things we liked. One, it had to be thin. But remember, Razr wasn't just thin. It also had dramatically larger display than people used to have. So we thought the display was going to be important, and that's why we went to OLED display. Second was user materials. It had a metallic look. People liked that surprising user material. We used Kevlar in the new one, and it needed to be presented as being dramatic. So we looked at the brand promise and brand value, and we actually tested very, very well. And Razr, by the way, is the only phone at any carrier which has beaten iPhone in sales. So I think in first quarter, Razr outsold iPhone on Verizon's network. So it did extremely well. Having said that, iPhone is just a phenomenal product and a great juggernaut. So
In this Internet of Things that we're coming towards, right, towards beyond 4G, right, where we need to move to the convergence of enterprise machine to machine. I'd like to get your perspective.
I think that all of those things will happen, and the real challenge is virtually always, by the way, and Qualcomm has proven it, Google has proven it, Microsoft proved it,
Yes.
Intel proved it,
Yes.
that when you create a very large company, virtually always it's not just technology, it's also changing business model. And I think the question I always, if you all of us have read the Clayton Christensen books, you have to understand what your channel is and where the innovation is and who your customer is and which customer is not being served. I think those are the things that lead to innovation in my view. But again, Upkar, you are very experienced in these matters, so I would love to hear your perspective.
Sanjay, the question now about vertical integration and semi-vertically integrated firms on the handset space, is that a criteria for success going forward, especially Apple and Samsung doing similar things on the vertically integrated strategy?
Yeah, the PC industry clearly was a horizontal industry. And if you look at the Android part of the industry in the handset is clearly a horizontal industry, or largely a horizontal industry. Apple has demonstrated that vertical done right can be very dramatic. It actually is interesting. Clayton Christensen always says that there is a phase of verticalization and then it's followed by horizontalization, right? And an interesting thing is that Apple has sort of been counter to that. In PC business, which is a completely horizontal business, completely commodity business, Clayton's thought would be that that is the profitable segment. Well, there are 2 people who are making money, right? Intel and Microsoft, but no one else is making much money. And Apple today is the most profitable PC manufacturer, let alone the most profitable handset manufacturer. So at the moment, there's no doubt in my mind that we have a relentless trend towards verticalization. I think what we ought to have is a trend towards very thoughtful horizontalization and verticalization. I don't know that either one of them is the right answer. If you at the moment, nearly everyone will tell you verticalization is a better way to go. I think you have to look at the particular circumstances of the market and the conditions and what can be done and what can't be done to understand whether that makes sense or not.
Okay, so it seems like the wireless industry has been battling it out for this fixed pie over the past few years.
It's not a fixed pie. It's a dramatically expanding pie.
Okay, well that kind of leads to my question. So I want to get your opinion on where the emerging opportunities are. And to be honest with you, I'm somewhat biased. I'm in the machine-to-machine space, so I'd like to get your opinion on that.
There's no doubt in my mind that you're thinking the right way, because I think there is dramatic opportunity. Only thing I would tell you, just to be a little cautious, those of us who've been burnt more than a few times have been hearing about M2M happening only for the last 15 years. So, but I would say there are arguments to make that time is better today. The data plans and the carriers are now beginning to understand. I have a perspective, and I'm not sure this is right. carriers are all beginning to see spectrum crunch because people are using a lot more data. But what they've not enabled is the $5 devices which consume 50 megabyte of data. If they could put a billion 50 megabyte devices which only generate $5 of revenue, that would change their economics quite dramatically. And I think all they've been doing is generating $30 of revenue over 3 gigabyte consumers. At some point, getting in the way of the $1 billion would be the wrong thing for them. There is good economic sense for them to enable that. So at least one player is very motivated. There are, I think you guys understand this business better than I, but there are some other barriers that need to be overcome, I think, in M2M. But I think health is very important as well.
Yeah, I think from that point of view, you went from gigabyte to thinking, you know, how do you make megabytes? But no, kilobytes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
his company is working kilobytes, and now think healthcare.
But I think at some point, megabyte and kilobyte are about the same.
Right, so the value, I mean, do you think the operators, because they want to be major players, I mean, he represents an industry that has been on somewhere else, and the operators now coming to that industry and thinking, I'm going to put an LTE chip into your blood pressure monitor. It's not going to be that way. So do you see that transition happening, and will they learn from them, or will they stamp out their own?
I think it will happen. I think it's got to happen. There's too much money in it. And I think I think that the question to ask is, what are the barriers, and who will remove the barriers to make it happen at the appropriate scale? That's the issue.
When cellular came in, they destroyed the landline monopoly by providing a much better price service in anytime, anywhere. When do you see that wireless is going to destroy cable company and content delivery?
I am not convinced that there is any rational way to deliver all the content that you consume over wireless in a cost-effective way. I just don't see it. I'll tell you what, I'll give you some example. At the moment, Americans watch about 155 hours of TV. 155 hours of TV. If you take over cable, over what I'd call QAM network, point-to-point network, or circuit switch network, not an IP network. If you look at total consumption of video, this is a shocking part of it, total consumption of video on the internet, it amounts to about 20 to 25 hours of consumption. But there are 115 million homes in US, and the number I gave you, 154 hours, is average over 115 million homes. Only 30 million homes consume, I think the numbers may have grown up, 30 to 40 million, 25 hours. And that then amounts to about 70% of bandwidth of the internet. That's fixed internet, not wireless internet.
I mean the television where you have the broadcast capability to cell phones or your iPads.
My point is that I don't think we have the wireless bandwidth to deliver all the content. I actually think that today, over 90% of the content you consume comes to you over wired network to your home. And even that 10% is overloading the cellular network. And I'm saying that some of it will transfer over. There are lots of different content. Time-sensitive content I could easily see being made available over a BMS system into handsets. But if I wanted to watch an HD movie from Netflix, watching it over, I pay, I have a 6 gigabyte data plan. I'd run out of it in 6 days. And so I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that that is an economic and a viable way to deliver content. That's not to say that the kind of deal that Verizon has done with cable companies are not the right way. There will be much more transfer of content. There's no reason why I couldn't have 256 gigabyte of content sitting in my device and I could watch it. It's just replenished when I go home or go somewhere else over much cheaper networks. So it may be that mobilizing the content is more important than delivering it over wireless.
Okay. Sanjay, thank you so much for sharing. I didn't know about your personal beginnings, your humble origins. It's very impressive. You know, as you look back on your life, you know, from that start that you shared with us, obviously your many successes since then, what would you say has been the key or some of the key things that you think have been instrumental to your success?
I think in business as well as in personal life, I think perseverance is underestimated a lot. I feel, I think a lot of people, especially in corporations, spend a lot of time on strategy. And I think strategy is clearly important, but I think the importance of perseverance is underestimated dramatically. I think I've failed more often than I've succeeded. I have persevered, I think, is the right answer. That's one. Second has been that I've been lucky. And third is that I've virtually always enjoyed what I've done. So I think those were the three things that have been important for me.
Do you attribute your success to have been at the right place at the right time? And what is your secret?
Absolutely. I said, I have achieved way beyond my talent. There's no doubt in my mind of that. I think it's shocking to me how many incredibly talented people I work with and who have contributed in small and large parts to my success. But I've certainly, you know, I am a big believer in the saying that you work hard and you get lucky, or actually Lincoln, I think, the harder I work, the luckier I get. I absolutely believe in that. I think I've always worked hard. I've enjoyed that, and I've persevered, and I've certainly been at the right place at the right time. I actually don't think that all of us, somewhere in our life, are at the right place at the right time. The question is, are we able to seize the moment? And I think, do we see it? Do we recognize when we are at the right place at the right time? And I think I've been, again, fortunate.
You mentioned the importance of cash flow, and when the company's core product is doing well and the cash flow is coming, how does the CEO ensure that you're also focused on disruptive technologies? And then related to that, is there some magic percentage of your R&D budget that you should devote to potentially disruptive technologies?
Yeah, so I'm very much a cash flow person. You should be looking at cash flow and particularly growth in cash flow and growth in top line and bottom line as being important criteria. So I'm a big believer in cash flow. So, but let me go to your question. Your question was, if you have good cash flow, how do you make sure that you allocate appropriate resources? Excuse me. I think you have to have, as the leadership of the company has to have a strategic perspective. There's no shortage of companies that have had extremely good cash flows and have then not done well. I think it is extremely easy to become extremely complacent. See, the biggest thing that happens is if you have a, say, $3 billion cash flow as a CEO, you're sitting there and someone brings an idea and you say, it just doesn't move the needle. That is the single biggest problem, right? Because if you have a $2 billion cash flow and the business that someone brings is 50 million, ought you to invest in it? Because the big question you're faced with, even if you invest and take the risk, does it make a difference? And I think that this is where you need to be able to say, what is it that will kill the cash flow? What are the threats to the cash flow? And you have to, in some way, directly, indirectly invest in protecting yourself against that as well. Also, of course, you have to invest in growing your cash flow. And there are two ways. You can either do what I call line extension or adjacent business expansion or disruption. And I think most mature companies would invest in both ways.
Very good. I think we will end here. Thank you all for asking your questions, and thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you very much.